Star Trek reveals what happens to old Starfleet uniforms. The question of what happens to old Starfleet uniforms has finally been answered in Star Trek Lower Decks. Star Trek's changing uniforms started early as Star Trek. The original series' color-coded uniforms were replaced by muted unitards in Star Trek The Motion Picture and Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan's long-lived Monster Maroon. As a prequel series, Star Trek Enterprise introduced a blue jumpsuit grounded in modern flight suits. Star Trek Discovery bridged the Star Trek timeline uniform gap with a sleek blue two-piece that quickly evolved into Star Trek Strange New Worlds Take On 2's classic uniforms. In Star Trek Lower Decks Season 5, Episode 5, Starbase 80, the USS Cerritos is forced to make a stop at the infamously terrible Starbase to get a replacement navigation part. El-Orion Commander Cassia NOX, Nicole Byer, explains that Starbase 80 operates on a mishmash of outdated technology from around the 2260s because the station isn't a high priority for Starfleet. The result is that Star Trek Lower Decks' basket of Easter eggs for Starbase 80 is curated from Star Trek, the original series, or even Star Trek Enterprise 100 years before that. Star Trek Lower Decks Season 5, Episode 5, Starbase 80 reveals what happens to old Starfleet uniforms when Lieutenant Devanna Tendi, Noel Wells, stops to admire a clothing shop stocked with outfits from Star Trek history. There are a few non-Starfleet gems, like a 2260s Klingon uniform and an Edo onesie from Star Trek The Next Generation, but most of the shop's offerings represent the ever-changing uniforms of Starfleet's past. The store clerk flatly informs Tendi that these are the uniforms of long-dead men. The phaser burns and a pile of TOS-era red shirts pretty much confirm that claim. In the 24th century, old Starfleet uniforms would normally be recycled by the replicator, but Starbase 80 doesn't have replicators. At best, Starbase 80 might have a 23rd century matter synthesizer that makes uniforms, as seen in Star Trek Discovery, but the station's general state of disrepair means those probably don't work that well, if at all. It's a lot easier for the residents of Starbase 80 to make do with what they've been able to repair or scavenge. It's not that grim to strip the uniforms off dead officers and reuse them for new staff, is it? With Starbase 80, Star Trek Lower Decks creates a brilliant throwback to Star Trek Enterprise and Star Trek, the original series, without the perils of time travel in Star Trek. The USS Cerritos crew has to use Enterprise's theoretically sexy but ultimately dodgy decon gel before boarding. Jerry O'Connell's commander Jack Ransom is a big fan. TOS-era wall comms replace comm badges, and the turbolifts have twist handles. It's a great way to give the Star Trek Lower Decks treatment to an era that's been tricky to honor, aside from name-dropping Scott Bakula's Captain Jonathan Archer or Denobulin Turris. Star Trek Lower Decks is great at celebrating the beauty of weird and obscure stuff that Star Trek has wrought throughout its history. The often maligned Starbase 80 being a functioning time capsule of antique technology makes it the Starbase equivalent of Star Trek Enterprise. Commander NOX and Chief Engineer Jean-Luc Stephen Root, can choose from multiple styles of Starfleet uniforms worn by dead officers, but they deliberately choose to don 2150s Starfleet uniforms. Wearing Enterprise-era uniforms while cheerily championing Starbase 80 is like Star Trek Lower Decks saying Star Trek Enterprise isn't nearly as long dead as it seems. In the expansive universe of Star Trek, much focus is placed on the exploration of strange new worlds, the discovery of alien species, and the ever-present challenge of keeping the peace among the stars. Yet, for all the attention paid to galactic diplomacy and technological innovations, some questions have lingered in the minds of fans for years, questions that relate to the more mundane aspects of Starfleet life. One such curiosity is, what happens to old Starfleet uniforms when they are no longer in use? Star Trek, in a surprising turn of events, recently delved into this seemingly trivial matter, shedding light on a previously unexplored aspect of the Federation. A storied legacy of Starfleet uniforms. Starfleet uniforms have long been iconic within the Star Trek franchise, serving as a visual marker of rank, duty, and the values upheld by the United Federation of Planets. Over the centuries depicted in the various series, from Star Trek, the original series, to Star Trek Discovery, these uniforms have evolved in design, function, and material. Some have been practical and militaristic, while others embrace the sleekness and minimalism reflective of future utopian ideals. With so many redesigns, one begins to wonder what happens to the old ones. In a galaxy where recycling and resource management are paramount, it would seem odd for Starfleet to simply discard outdated uniforms. After all, the Federation is known for its advancements in sustainability and efficiency. The recently revealed answer to this question, however, was more than a simple recycling bin solution. The reclamation and reuse of uniforms, according to newly unearthed details from Federation archives in Star Trek Discovery, old Starfleet uniforms go through a multi-tiered reclamation process, depending on their condition and historical significance. Uniforms worn by high-ranking officers, captains of notable starships, or those present during key historical events are rarely discarded. Instead, they are preserved, often put on display in museums like the Fleet Museum seen in Star Trek Picard. These preserved uniforms serve not only as historical artifacts, but as a reminder of the bravery and service of those who wore them. Some have even been handed down through generations, becoming family heirlooms among Starfleet officers. For uniforms that don't have the same level of historical importance, there's still a process in place to ensure that they don't simply go to waste. Fabrics are recycled using advanced replicator technology. The replicators, a hallmark of Star Trek technology, are capable of breaking down matter at the molecular level and reassembling it into new items. Old uniforms are broken down and transformed into new ones, or the materials are repurposed for other uses across Starfleet. In this way, Starfleet not only maintains a commitment to sustainability, but also honors the service of each officer by giving their uniforms a second life. A new purpose for old uniforms. Interestingly, a portion of retired uniforms are set aside for more creative uses. These uniforms, especially those with minor defects or wear that make them unsuitable for future service, are often donated to charitable organizations across the galaxy. In keeping with the Federation's ethos of compassion and unity, these uniforms are distributed to planets suffering from shortages of clothing or resources due to conflicts or natural disasters. While the sight of civilians donning Starfleet uniforms may seem strange at first, it speaks to the altruistic spirit of the Federation, turning a symbol of authority into one of aid and solidarity. Furthermore, some uniforms, once they've served their purpose in Starfleet, find new life as training tools. On Federation training outposts and holodecks, older uniforms are repurposed for cadets to use in simulation exercises. These are often seen during holodeck tactical drills or training missions where cadets can practice starship operations without requiring pristine or freshly fabricated attire. It's a way to instill discipline and respect for Starfleet traditions in new recruits while ensuring resources aren't wasted. Historical impact and symbolism. On a deeper level, Starfleet uniforms hold significant symbolic weight in the Star Trek universe. Each iteration represents the spirit of the times within Starfleet and the Federation as a whole. In the early years, as seen in the original series, the bright colors and streamlined design reflected optimism and bold exploration. In later series, such as Star Trek Deep Space Nine and Star Trek The Next Generation, the uniforms evolved into more utilitarian designs, reflecting the Federation's growing responsibilities in maintaining peace and defending against threats. By preserving or repurposing uniforms, Starfleet ensures that these symbols of unity, exploration, and service live on. The Federation's approach to old uniforms mirrors its broader philosophy. Nothing is wasted,